So there are 19 neighborhoods here in Calgary that dropped their benchmark price year over year. Well, what does that mean for you when you're buying a property? Well, that's what we're talking about today. In December 2023, we did this video up here, and it was talking about all the hottest markets at the time and the neighborhoods that were growing the most. And the crazy part is that it was all driven by condos. Now, is that the same that's happening this year? I don't think so. Calgary's and condos, they just don't typically get along very well. So until we have condo complexes and neighborhoods that are kind of built all for families and they're open to actually living in a building versus buying a house, I just don't see Calgary and condos getting along for a long time. So what are these neighborhoods that are dropping in value? Let's go find out. So there was actually 19 neighborhoods that actually decreased in price year over year from their benchmark numbers at the beginning of this year, which is a lot of places. So we're gonna look at where are they, what do they look like, and how do they all kind of tie together? What is the common denominator here? So the first area we're going to talk about is the north and the northwest. The first one we're going to talk about is Sage Hill. So Sage Hill is right beside Nolan Hill, and both of these neighborhoods are on this list. Sage Hill had a benchmark price of $474,200, and it dropped 1% year over year. Now Nolan Hill, it had a benchmark price of $577,300. It also dropped 1% year over year. Now, just beside both of these neighborhoods is one called Sherwood. Now, Sherwood is not one that we've typically talked about very much on this channel. It doesn't come up in the stats very often, but it saw a 3% drop and its benchmark price was $624,600. Now, the final one in the northwest area is Panorama Hills. It's one of Calgary's largest communities, and it has a benchmark price of $535,600, and it actually saw a 4% decrease year over year. So now we'll head over to the northeast part of Calgary, where there are 5 neighborhoods that have all dropped in value. Now the first one is Redstone. Now it's located on the real northern part of the northeast area. It had a benchmark price of $533,300, and it dropped about 3%. Just south of that is Skyview Ranch. It had a benchmark price of $403,900, and it also dropped 3% year over year. And then we have Saddle Ridge. Well, Saddle Ridge is a really diverse area. Its benchmark price was $535,000, and it dropped 1%. Now, Taradale is another one of these areas. It has a real mix complex, but it had $527,700, and it also dropped 1%. And finally, Applewood. Applewood dropped 1% and has a benchmark price of $431,500. Now the 10 inner city neighborhoods, I mean, that's a lot of neighborhoods to list off, so I'm not gonna go through all of them, but I wanna highlight a few. So the first one is Shaganappi. Now Shaganappi is up. It's not quite inner city, but it's considered on the west side, but it had a benchmark price of $638,200, and it dropped 1%. Lower Mount Royal, so that is right south of downtown, it was only $263,000 benchmark, but it also dropped 1%. Now you go into places like Glenbrook, Kingsland, Garrison Greens, I mean Meadowlark Park was in there, which is really close to Chinook Center, really great area. Cliff Bungalow, Windsor Park, oh my goodness, whole bunch of these. But finally, Rideau Park. This is where we are right now. And this neighborhood actually dropped the most year over year. Its benchmark price, $524,300, but it dropped 18% year over year. So out of these 19 neighborhoods, there is something that we can look at and kind of figure out what happened here, right? So when we're looking at the 19 areas themselves, if we take over the last 90 days, we look at the active, the sold, as well as everything that went off market, so expired, terminated, withdrawn, that kind of thing, and break them out by property types, this is what happens. Apartments made up 43% of those 19 neighborhoods. Townhomes made up 23%. Semi-detached, like half duplexes, made up 5%. And detached homes, well, that was only 29%, which I was a little bit surprised by. But if you take the whole of Calgary, remove those 19 neighborhoods, this is what the numbers look like for that. Apartments made up 31%, which is less than the 19 neighborhoods. The townhomes made up 15%, which is less than the 19 neighborhoods. Detached or semi-detached places were 9%, and detached homes was actually 45%. So what do you do with this information? Well, here's what I did. I wanted to look at what the top 7 areas were and what did it break out in their neighborhoods. Those neighborhoods were Glenmore Park, Lakeview, Park Hill, St. Andrews Heights, Charleswood, Banff Trail, and Elbow Park. Very different neighborhoods than the 19 that we already talked about. 73% of their last 90-day numbers were detached homes. So if I was you, here's what I would do to position myself if I was buying in 2025. I would look at location. Location is really, really important. You can see on that map where the yellow dots, those are the top 7 areas, and they're all very much inner city. They're very much detached home driven neighborhoods. The other thing is if you're buying a condo or a townhome, you just know that Calgary and condos just don't get along. So buy into a complex that is run really, really well. That is going to serve you so good long term because, again, it could be kind of a finicky thing. And as you can tell, it doesn't matter if you're in the Northeast, the Northwest, inner city, condos in Calgary just don't get along. And the last thing that I would do is if you are considering buying in a good neighborhood, you may want to consider one of these neighborhoods because this is where a lot of people are purchasing.